Alright, so you've just installed RPGMaker MV and there's a lot of tools. Well, one of the first things you have to do is to create a map. So here's my simple tutorial on how to use the map making tools. Keep in mind this is not a tutorial on map making in itself, just the tools. So first of all you want to click inside this little map selection window and hit enter in order to create a new map. Then you can enter a map name, a display name. This should be pretty obvious what this does. Then you can set a tile set. These are the sets of tiles that you will be using for the map. I'll be showing you how to edit this later. Then you can set a width and a height of the map. These are how many tiles. It should be wide and high. It should be at both 255 or 256, but if you go into the game files you can edit this to be a larger number, though then it will have trouble running on certain devices. Then you can set whether it should loop, and by default it's no loop, so if you walk out on the edge nothing's going to happen except you're going to run into the edge. You can set it to loop vertically. In that case, if you walk up top or down bottom you'll appear on the other side of the screen. And horizontally it's left and right that loops, and loop both its all sides. Encounter steps is the average amount of steps you have to take between each encounter, so the lower this number is the more encounters, and 30 is definitely too low. I recommend setting it a lot higher than that. Then you can set a background music for the map that automatically plays while on the map, a background sound that automatically plays. So this could for instance be a theme like, I don't know, a dungeon theme if you want, and this is stuff like sound effects, so it plays an earthquake in the background. And you can set a specific battle bag for the map that appears in the background when battling. You can disable dashing so that the player can't dash on the map. You can set an image parallax, and you can have it loop, which means that it will move slowly to the side or up and down. And you can have it show in the editor or not show in the editor. I would recommend always having show in the editor checked. Then there's a note box which you can use to write notes, but it's not really that useful unless you've got plugins that allow you to make notebox note tags. Then you can set up encounters with different enemies, and you can edit weight in order to increase the likelihood of these things. If you want to, you can also say that it should only appear in specific regions, like for instance 1, 2 and 3. And if you set all of them to be only in specific regions, then outside of set regions you will not be getting any encounters. So the way that weight calculations work is just we add all of these weights together and then we have the chance for each of them. So for instance this would be 10 and 15 and 5 and 15. So now I've got a new map like this. So first things first, you should go to options and get some settings that you like. For instance, you could set the color of the transparent background. By default it's just 255, 255, 255, but I like 00128 more. You could have it show a map grid and set a size. I like 4 tiles by 4 tiles like this. Then you've got your 4 standard tools and the shadow pen. So the most standard is the pencil. It draws, really not that much to it. Then you've got the rectangle tool, which makes a rectangle, the circle tool, which makes a circle, and the flood fill, which is just the paint bucket. I don't know why they decided to call it flood fill instead. So what should be noted is that all of these tiles are auto tiles, which means that they will automatically create small borders around themselves in order to fit in better and have it look more natural. Now if you don't want borders, you can hold down the shift button while placing down auto tiles. It should also be noted, if you right click a tile, you'll eyedrop it, which if you just do to single tile, you might as well do it out here. But if for instance you've got something placed on top of the tile and you want to copy the entire thing, then you can do that too. Another neat thing is that I've mentioned you can hold down shift in order to place it down without borders. Well, if you eyedrop something and place it down, normally it's just like normal alt styles, but if you hold down shift, it'll be an exact copy of what you eyedropped. You can also mark multiple things at once, like this, though that's really a lot more useful if you do it in the editor. So say for instance we want to make a 3 tiles high wall, then you can just mark the entire thing and bam, there's the wall. Trump would be proud. So tileset subsets. We've got tileset A, which is parted into 5 sets. There's the animated tiles, which are tiles that are animated. For instance, this is water, which will be animated to show the water flowing. And that's an auto tile, which means that it will be made to border things. Then there's the normal ground tiles. They are also auto tiles. Then there's the building tiles, which are auto tiles too, as you may notice. These, if I find the correct one, for instance this one, that's an auto tile. And as you see, the roofs are auto tiles too. The walls too are auto tiles. And then you get to the more static tiles. These tiles are not. These tiles are auto tiles too. From this point on, all of these, they are not auto tiles. So for instance, this is not an auto tile. You have to, if you want to make a wider bridge, you have to manually make that wider. And the same goes for these stairs. And these ones are used for fine editing the corners, and they are not auto tiles either. And as for tileset B, that's, well, B through D are pretty much all the same. They are extra layers of stuff you can put on the maps. And these will be placed on top of the previous tile, and you can even place multiple tiles from these tile sets on top of each other. And the layers placed will always be on top, but you can only have 2 at a time. So if you place down a 3rd one, it will remove the oldest. And it should be noted that placing down multiples of the same will not layer them on top of each other. The region tool is a more interesting one. So if, for instance, if we take a look at what I wrote here, you see that I've set bat and slime to only appear in regions 1, 2 and 3. So for instance, if I were to create a patch of tall grass like this or something like that, then I could have, then I could simply have this, mark all of these with set regions, and now I will encounter bats and slimes inside of this, but not outside of it. There's also a lot of other cool stuff that can be done with regions throughout the power of plugins. Now for the real interesting part is editing the tile sets. So for this there are set up some standard tile sets that use the default graphics. For now let's just create our own tile set, because why not? And first of all you need to pick your animated tiles. These are the A1 tiles. So let's create a tile set for a dungeon. So we'll just pick dungeon A1. Then the ground tiles, these are the A2 auto tiles for the ground. So do we pick dungeon auto tiles ground here? Well, might as well. Now for buildings, now dungeons don't have any buildings, but if if we want to, we can just pick from another set. That's a cool thing about setting up your own tile sets. You can also use your own files if you put them into the folder. Now if we just use the default dungeon tiles for all of this, like this, and then you can also pick these B tile sets, and there's really no difference between B, C, D and E, except where in the editor they show up. So for instance, I also want to bring the inside sets, I can do that too. So for this next part, you want to set all of these to be impassable, because when there's a circle on them, it means you can pass through them, but you don't always want that. For instance, if there's a hole, you don't want the player to be able to pass through that, and you don't want to be able to walk through walls either. Now, walls have a special property where you can also walk on top of walls. So if you're on these wall tiles, then you can walk from those to each other, but not to the ground, which is pretty neat too. If you go into the tile sets B, you have another option than just passable and not passable, and that's a star passable, which is just a designation for this will be appearing on top of the player. You can also set passage for direction, where you can enter which specific ways you should be able to enter and leave these tiles. You can set up ladders, which means that players will always face upwards while on these tiles. You can set up bush tiles, which are tiles that will be drawn half over the player but not entirely, so that it looks like the player is submerged in them, or they go up to the player's hips. Then you can set counter tiles, which just make them be drawn slightly lower, and you can interact with events across the tiles. It's a damage floor, which damages the player as you walk across them, and you can give terrain tags, which assign terrain numbers. It's mostly not that useful because regions are used a lot more than terrains. Then you just give it a name, and then if we want to use it in a map, we just go into the map and pick that tile set. Simple as that. Now if we want a map to be a submap, we can just drag it under the map we want to be a submap of. If we have a map marked while we create a new map, it will be a submap of set map, while if we just mark main, then nothing special happens. And lastly, I think I should be explaining the shadow tool, which, like I said earlier, is not really that useful. So if we were to, well, that's way too tall, create a house like this, it will automatically create shadows, and same goes for walls. They will also automatically create shadows, but if we don't want that, we can remove them and then use the shadow tools to edit shadows. As you'll see, a shadow tool divides itself into a smaller grid that's 4 of these on each normal tile, 2 by 2, and it should be noted that a tile is 48 by 48 pixels, so the shadow tool will create 24 by 24 pixels of a slightly darker gradient over the current one. And lastly, there's just some minor tools. For instance, using plus and minus, you can zoom, but you can also do that with mouse wheel and control at the same time. And lastly, you can switch it into the event editor, which is where you set up the functional parts of your map. So for instance, I could say set starting position player, and this will be where the player starts, and set starting position boat, and this is where we get a boat. So player wants into the boat, and they can now sail around, and they move out of the boat stays in place. And you can create quick events, which I guess could work, but I recommend not. And you can also create new events, though that is not really that much mapping and more eventing. So I guess I'll be coming back to that later. So that's pretty much about it. If we boot the game, we should be able to navigate the map, which is really not a map I put effort into, since I was just showcasing the tools. If I then hold down control, I can cheat myself on top of this wall, and as you can see, can't leave it. Buildings you can't walk on top of. If I walk in here and walk around a bit, I should encounter enemies sooner or later. Maybe set it too high. There we go. And now I'm getting beaten up entirely. There we go. And water also. Wait a minute, that's not the correct boat. Yeah, that's the reason. But the map works like it's supposed to. So yeah, over and out.